Hi, this is Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Intra Arbor Solutions, and you're listening to Briefings Direct. Our next Briefings Direct Data Security Insights discussion explores how cloud deployment planners need to be ever vigilant for all types of cybersecurity attack vectors. Stay with us now as we examine how those moving to and adapting to cloud deployments can make their data and processes safer and easier to recover from security incidents. To learn more about taking the right precautions for cloud and distributed data safety, please join me now and welcome our guests. We're here with Mark McIntyre, Senior Director of Cybersecurity Solutions Group at Microsoft. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We're also here with Sudhir Mehta. He's Global Vice President of Product Management and Strategy at Unisys. Welcome, Sudhir.
Hey, Dana. Thanks for having me.
We're glad you're with us. Mark, let's start with you. What's changed in how data is being targeted for those using cloud models like Azure? And how is that different from, say, 2 or 3 years ago?
Well, first of all, the good news is that we do see more and more organizations around the world, perhaps in today's case, U.S. government, but for broader purposes, we're seeing more and more global cloud adoption. I think that's great. Organizations around the world recognize the business value and I think increasingly the security value. The challenge, the challenge I've experienced personally and what I see happening around is one really of expectations. Who owns what as you go to the cloud? And so we really, really need to be crisper and clearer with our partners and our customers as to who owns what responsibility in terms of monitoring and managing your IT environment as you transition from a traditional on-premises environment, perhaps all the way up into a software as a services environment.
So here, same question. What's changed from your perspective at Unisys as to what the security requirements are and how that's been, something in motion? It's been changing.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing is when organizations, they're moving data and workloads to the cloud, many of them actually underestimate the complexities of securing hybrid on-prem cloud ecosystems. And so what we've seen is a lot of the failures or what we would call as security breaches or intrusions, you could attribute pretty much to inadequate security practices, policies, and procedures, as well as misconfiguration errors. And then what we've also seen is cloud security breach reports have been on the rise. Container technology adds flexibility and speed to market, but that also is introducing a lot of vulnerabilities and complexities. The other is, a lot of customers have, legacy on-prem security methodologies and technologies, which obviously they cannot use or can no longer use or leverage, in this new dynamic, elastic nature of today's cloud environment. And then if you look at Gardner pretty much estimates that through 2022, at least 95% or so of cloud security failures will be customers' fault. So, the net of it is cloud security exposure, the attack surface is potentially on the rise. The exposure is growing.
Yeah, Mark, so people, process, and technology, perhaps all three of those could be changing as organizations move towards the cloud model. Security practices can fall through the cracks. What are you seeing in terms of how a comprehensive cloud security approach can be brought to this so that we don't have these security issues and cloud retains its sterling reputation for security?
First of all, I completely agree with what my colleague from Unisys said. Not to crack a joke, this is a serious topic, but I and my colleagues meet a lot with U.S. government counterparts or commercial counterparts, and they'll ask us the question. They'll say, Microsoft, you're a large cloud provider. What keeps you awake at night? What are you scared of? And it's always a delicate conversation because we need to sort of tactfully turn it around and say, well, you customer, you keep us awake at night because when you come into our cloud, we inherit your adversaries. We inherit your vulnerabilities, your configuration challenges. And so we really need to make sure that, we move to the left a bit. And so as a customer is planning a cloud migration, which of course will invariably include a variety of resources still being, left on-prem and traditional infrastructure, we need to make sure that we really, really help them understand benefits that are already built in to the cloud, whether you're an IaaS or platform as a service or up into SaaS, and then be really clear with them, our customers, through our partners in many cases, on how a lot of the technologies that they need to make themselves more secure and give them awareness into their posture are built right into the fabric of the cloud service.
So here, it sounds as if organizations who haven't been doing things quite as well as they should on premises need to be even more mindful of improving on their security posture as they move to the cloud so that they don't take their vulnerabilities with them. From Unisys's perspective, how should organizations get their, their house cleaning done before they move to the cloud? What should you be thinking before you go to the cloud?
What we always recommend is customers should absolutely first look at, putting their house in place or house in order. So the security hygiene is extremely important, whether you look at data protection, information protection, your overall exposure to access, whether it's from employees working at home or through to vendors or third parties where they have access to a lot of your information and data. So I think the first and foremost is make sure you've got the appropriate framework established. Then compliance and policy management is extremely important when you move to the cloud and, look at more of the virtual containerized frameworks where you look at, a lot of the work today, for instance, many of the companies do their application development in the cloud because it's a lot more dynamic. So what we always recommend our customers is make sure you have the appropriate policy management, the appropriate assessments in place, the appropriate compliance checks done, both for on-prem and then in your journey to the cloud. And the net of it is, if you've got that appropriately managed when you're on-prem, the chances are as you move on the journey from hybrid to a much more cloud-native deployment or cloud-native services, you are more likely to get it right. As against, to your question, if you don't have it in place when you're on-prem, you obviously have an uphill battle in making sure you're secure in the cloud.
Mark, are there any issues around identity and authentication? It seems to me that could be something a little bit different as you move from on-premises outside of your firewall into a cloud deployment model. What should organizations be thinking about specifically around identity, authentication, and making sure people have the right access, either too much or too little?
This is a huge area right now, focus. Even within our own company, Microsoft, we as employees, we operate in essentially an identity-driven security model. And so it's proper that you call this out on this podcast, that the idea that you can monitor all traffic, and that you're going to filter all traffic, and you're going to make meaningful conclusions from that in real time while still running your business, while still doing your mission is just not the best use of your time and your resources. Much better to switch to a more modern identity-based model where you can actually incorporate newer concepts. Within Microsoft, we have a term called modern workplace. It's a whole set of business for us, essentially. And it's a reflection of the fact that government organizations, enterprises around the world, are having to hopefully anticipate, be able to provide a work environment, a collaboration environment where their people can work in a way that reflects their personal preferences, personal devices, things like that. Perhaps they can work at home or on a home Wi-Fi, or work at a coffee shop or restaurant or whatever. And so the whole way that that work has changed around the enterprise is definitely forcing this opportunity, let's call it, to look at creating a more modern identity framework. For that matter, we think about, if you look at some of the initiatives going on in the U.S. government right now, this term that we're hearing, zero trust networking, microsegmentation. These are case in point. Terms like these, initiatives like these, recognize that we know people need to keep working, they need to keep doing their jobs. And so the idea is more to accept the fact that people will always cause some level of risk to the organization. We're curious, we're reasonably smart, well-intentioned people. We make mistakes like anybody else. So let's create an identity-driven model that allows the organization to get better insight into, and therefore control over, authentications, requests for resources, end-to-end throughout a life cycle.
And so here, Unisys has been working with a number of public sector organizations on some technologies that help support a stronger posture around authentication and other technologies. Tell us a little bit about what you found over the past few years and how that can be applied to some of these challenges when it comes to moving to the cloud like Azure.
So Dana, I think, if you look at going back in time, one of the requests we had got from DoD federal side, there was a concern around the access to information and data. So Unisys was requested by DoD in terms of coming through with a framework and an implementation solution where they were looking at more of a microsegmentation solution, very similar to on the lines of what Mark just mentioned. So fast forward, since then, we've deployed and released a capability which we call as military-grade capability called Stealth, wherein we are able to manage microsegmentation, where we do use what we would classify as based encrypted microseg that controls the access to the different hosts or endpoints based on the identity of the user, and allowing or permitting only authorized users to communicate with approved endpoints and denying unauthorized communications, preventing the spread of east-west lateral attacks.
Now, Mark, maybe for those in our audience who aren't that technology savvy, what does microsegmentation mean and do, and why has this become an important supporting and foundational capability for security in a cloud environment?
First of all, I do want to call out Unisys' great work here, the real leadership in this last several years. So, yeah, it's a great point. This idea that a zero trust environment can essentially gate or control east to west, left to right behavior, activity in an environment. So, for example, think about a traditional collaboration environment, or just a traditional IT environment where devices are not really managed, or they're centralized. They're corp-issued devices. You can't really take them out of the facility, of course. You don't really authenticate once you're on a network because you're sort of already in a physical campus environment or complex environment or building. And so in a more modern collaboration environment, and of course enterprises are generally out ahead of this, but it's coming to government too. And government, they know this. And so now you essentially can let's say, split out or parse out your subjects and your objects. Subjects trying to access objects. You can split them out and say, we're going to create all user accounts with a certain set of parameters, kind of a least privilege need to know model. We're going to enforce, strong controls. We're going to have them set up with certain least privilege rights. And of course, in an ideal world, if you can get to a real mature setting, you could even go a step further and start implementing biometrics just to get off some of your password dependencies. But number one, you want to verify the identity. Is this person, is this subject who we think they are, who they should be, based on a variety of different attributes, behavior, activity, things like that. And then you can also apply the same controls to a device and say, okay, this user, they're using this certain device. Is this device healthy? Is it built to today's image? Is it patched? Is it clean? Is it approved to even be used in this environment? And if so, to what level? And then you can then you can go a step further and say, in this model, that now we're going to verify the access. Is this person able to use, or should this person be able to use our resources, go through the public internet, whatever, to access certain corporate resources? Should we allow an unmanaged device to have a level of access to a confidential document within the company, for example, or maybe that should only be on a managed device? So you can create these real flexible authentication scenarios based on what you know about the subjects at hand and about the objects, about the files that they want to access. It's a much more flexible, modern way to interact. And to be blunt, for example, with Microsoft, Azure Active Directory offers that capability just built into the service. So microsegmentation might sound like a lot of work for your security team or your identity team, but really it's a great example of a cloud service that runs in the background to help you actually set up the right rules and then let the service work for you.
And so here, just to be clear for our audience, the Unisys Stealth Cloud Extended Data Center for Microsoft Azure, is that a service that you get from the cloud? Is that something that you would implement on premises? Is there different models for how you would implement and deploy this? Maybe explain a little bit the topology of how this comes to market.
Yeah, so with Azure, with Microsoft, of course, we've got a fantastic relationship. So we've been working with Microsoft over the years for Stealth. So the way we've got this structured is, if you're looking at a customer who is going through their journey, we've been able to deploy what we would call a hybrid stealth deployment. So in other words, where we help customers is we help customers do what we would call as isolation with the help of communities of interest, which we create. So communities of interest is where you basically create a grouping of hosts, users, and resources based on like-based interests, right? And what you then do is, when there is a request to communicate, you create the appropriate stealth encrypted tunnels. So in this case, if you have a scenario where you are doing the appropriate communication between an on-prem host with a cloud-based host, you would be able to do that through a secure encrypted tunnel. And the other thing which we have implemented is we do what we call as cloaking. So cloaking is where if someone is not authorized to communicate with a certain host or a certain member of a community of interest, you basically do not get a response back. So cloaking is what we do as part of the stealth implementation. And working with Microsoft, as I mentioned, we've got a fantastic relationship. We've also been able to establish a capability through a discovery API, wherein when Microsoft releases new Azure services, we are able to update, the overall protocol and framework for stealth with the updated Azure services. So customers or clients who've had Azure workloads protected by stealth, there is no disruption from a productivity standpoint or from an ability for them to leverage whatever applications they are running on Azure cloud. So the net of it is, we've been able to establish the appropriate journey, a secure journey for customers from an on-prem to cloud, the hybrid journey. And then we've also made sure that for customers who are, leveraging Azure cloud with their different workloads, we are able to maintain the appropriate level of secure communication as they would have had in an on-prem deployment as well.
And Mark, how new is this? When does this become readily available? Is it already generally available? What's the timeline on how these technologies come together to make a whole greater than the sum of the parts when it comes to security and authentication?
Well, Microsoft has already we're already essentially offering zero trust, certainly identity first or identity-based, security offerings or capabilities through our services. They have not traditionally been, we haven't traditionally named them as such, although we definitely are working along the path right now. One of our executive vice presidents, Kurt Dalbany, is on the Defense Innovation Board. He's playing a leadership role in establishing essentially DoD or U.S. government priorities on zero trust. And so this will be something that will be the next several months that we will be essentially putting more direct clarity around, just so we can help our partners and customers better map capabilities that they already own against emerging priorities and requirements like these. So definitely look for that. In fact, if I may make a plug, Unite DC is February 6th and 7th, downtown Washington, and this is certainly on the agenda there. So we'll have updates at that conference as well. But generally speaking, any customer can take the underlying services that we're offering and implement this. And I think what's even better, especially with Unisys on the call, is that we have companies that are already out there doing this. And so that's even better for a company like us, of course, because we rely greatly on our partners like Unisys to go out and really have those deep architecture type conversations with their stakeholders.
Sudhir, when people are using the combined combination of or solution combination of Azure and Stealth for cloud, this is not something that just helps them when they are preparing to improve their posture. When they're in an attack, there are ways in which this can be used as well. So how do we think about this, not just in terms of protecting yourself in terms of posture, but reacting to attacks in real time or close to it in such a way that you can prevent damage from spreading?
Good question. I think, before I get into, ways by which we can dynamically address that, I just wanted to also share that internally within Unisys, what we would classify as Unisys IT, we have already moved on this cloud journey where Stealth is actually securing our Azure cloud deployments. And we are 95% already deployed on Azure in terms of internal Unisys applications. And Stealth is protecting those applications. So just, we eat our own dog food, right? And then in terms of, let's say if there is a situation where there is instant of compromise or an IOC which occurs, right? we do have a capability called dynamic isolation, where if you are looking at a managed SOC situation, we have the SOC empowered to contain a risk very quickly. So what we do is we are able to isolate a user and their device within 10 seconds. So that's a goal we have set ourselves. And so let's say if you have a situation where someone turns nefarious, which could be intentional or it could be coincidental, we would be able to isolate the user. And then we would have different thresholds of isolation, wherein, let's say, a high threshold level being breached across like 8 out of 10 means we completely isolate the user. Let's say if there's a threshold level 5 or 6, we may still give the user certain levels of access, right? So within a certain group, they would continue to access or be able to communicate. So dynamic isolation is a capability which we have released, wherein we are able to isolate a user and their device and have different levels of thresholds while we have like a managed SOC go through their cycles of trying to identify what really happened as part of what we would call as advanced response or EDR. And Unisys is perhaps the only solution out there or capability wherein we can actually isolate a user or their device within the span of seconds. We actually can do it now within 10 seconds.
If I could also mention, getting back to your question, asking about what Microsoft's plans were in this area, I'm very happy to share with you and with the audience reference architecture that we have for how we've implemented zero trust within Microsoft. Essentially, it relies on Intune for device management, Azure Active Directory, of course, for identity as the store. It's a way that we right now internally manage our own employees, including my access to corporate resources via my personal device and also, of course, a work issue device. So very happy that between what Unisys already has in the marketplace and what we have out there and what we're even using internally, I think there's some really, really strong reference architectures already available to listeners.
Very good. Now, this started with the Department of Defense, among the largest enterprises you could conceive of. But I'm wondering if this is something that goes down market well. Can small to medium-sized businesses that are using Azure aggressively and or moving from an on-premises model take advantage of this as well as the larger enterprises? So the question is this applied to mom and pop shops as well as the biggest enterprises? And how might that work? And I'll throw that out to either one of you.
Well, I'll take a stab. Thank you. So first of all, this is something that would be ideally available for a small, medium business because in theory, or perhaps if we've seen in practice, small or medium businesses likely do not have the large, bureaucratic or the large logistical or infrastructure dependencies. They're probably more flexible in terms of how they can implement solutions. It's a great way, going to the cloud is a great way for them to save money up front, on traditional infrastructure. So I'd like to believe that small or medium businesses would actually have a really good chance, literally just, natively to take an idea like this and implement it.
Sudhir, anything to offer on that in terms of the technology and how it's applicable both up and down market?
Yeah, I think, Mark's spot on. I think it obviously from our perspective, if you look at Stealth, it resonates really well for small to mid and to enterprise, right? I think the small to mid, the benefit is, as Mark mentioned, your ability to move quick is there. And with Stealth, we have certain capabilities, like we have an Aware capability, which can discover and visualize your users. And then thereafter, you can very quickly be able to automatically virtualize any network into the communities of interest, which I mentioned earlier, finding identity role-based COIs. So from a small to mid, you can get going within a matter of a day or two. If you're a larger enterprise, you can then define your journey, whether it's from on-prem to cloud, depending on what you're actually trying to migrate or run in the cloud. So I would say absolutely both. And it would also, what you're really looking at managing and deploying. But the opportunities, I would say, would be there for both.
As companies, large and small, are evaluating this and trying to discern their interest, let's look at some of the benefits. Now, as you point out, Sudhir, eating your own dog food. And Mark has described how this is being used at Microsoft Azure as well. Do you have ways that you can look at before and after, measure quantitatively, qualitative, maybe anecdotally, why this has been beneficial? And that's always a hard thing, of course, in security to prove something that didn't happen and why it didn't happen. But I'd like to just try to define what you get when you do stealth well.
Well, I'll defer to my colleague from Unisys on stealth well. It's their solution. We're proud to help them provide it.
Thanks, Mark. So the way I would frame the answer is really a couple of things, Dana. So one is there is certainly a reduction in costs. So when we've deployed for our 20,000 employees, our CISO obviously is a big supporter of stealth. And his read is, if you look at it pure from a cost perspective, we have seen significant reductions in costs. So prior to getting stealth implemented, we had a certain approach as it relates to network segmentation, right? So if you were to look at from a network equipment perspective, we have seen a reduction of over 70%. If you look at server infrastructure, there's a reduction of over 50%. The maintenance labor, it's a reduction of north of 60%. And then ongoing support labor has been a significant reduction as well. So that's one lens you could look at. The other lens, which has been interesting, is the VPN exposure. So as many of us know, that VPNs are perhaps the best breach route for hackers today. So what stealth does is when we've implemented stealth internally within Unisys, for a lot of our applications, we have done away with the requirement for logging into a VPN application. And that has made our access to a lot of applications, mainly around a lot of folks who log in from home or from a Starbucks, because the fact that when you communicate, you actually communicate through an encrypted tunnel and it's very secure. The VPN exposure, which was there, completely goes away. So, that's the best two lenses I could perhaps give the value prop for folks hearing this. Is one's obviously there is a cost reduction, and then the other is obviously the VPN exposure goes away. At least for Unisys, that's what we've implemented internally as well.
And so here, for those folks that are out there using virtual private networks, should they be perhaps, if they move to something like stealth, reevaluating their use of VPNs? Does the way in which VPNs add value change when you bring something like stealth in, and how much you reevaluate your use of VPNs in general?
Yeah, I think that's a good question because, obviously it will be remiss if you were to say you completely do away with VPNs, right? Because if you go back in time and see why VPNs were created, VPN overall framework was created for secure access for certain applications. And, since then, for whatever reasons, VPN became the only way people could communicate, let's say, from working from home. So the way we look at this is for applications which are not extremely limited to a few people, you should look at options wherein you don't necessarily need VPN. So you could look at a solution like stealth. And then if there are certain applications which are extremely secure, they need to be limited to only a few folks for whatever reason, that's where potentially you could consider using an application like a VPN.
Okay, let's look to the future a little bit. When you put these into practice, when you've got the great use of some of the automation that comes with it, baking these solutions into a hybrid cloud and then ultimately fully cloud native environment, what's the next shoe to fall? Is there something that you gain when you enter into this level of microsegmentation, exploiting these newer technologies? I'm just looking for whether this can be extended to the edge, for example, whether it has a role in IoT, whether it has a role in data transfer from organization to organization. So first to you, Mark, what does this put us in a position to do in the future that we couldn't have done before?
You hit on two really important points. Obviously, devices, IoT devices, for example, and data. And so data, increasingly, you see T-shirts now, you see slogans, data is the new oil and such. And from a security point of view, there's no question this is becoming the case where there's something like 44, 45 zettabytes of data projected to be out there by the next few years. And so this, as I mentioned earlier, this idea that you can employ traditional security monitoring practices, for example, layer 3 detection, things like that, it's just not going to allow you to work quickly enough, especially, by the way, especially in an environment where we're already challenged enough with our security workforce. There are not enough people out there. There's a global talent shortage. It's a fantastic opportunity sort of forced on us to rely more on modern authentication frameworks and on ML AI technologies to really take a lot of that lower level analysis, log analysis work out of humans and let machines do it to free people up for the higher level work. A couple of examples would be thinking about, so for example, we have a really interesting situation within the company. I think it's broader than Microsoft. It goes around the industry as well, where we have many organizations going to the cloud. But of course, as we mentioned earlier, they're still a bit unclear, I think, on roles and responsibilities. And we're also seeing big gaps in usage of cloud resources, let's say, versus security tools that are built into those resources. And so we're really trying to make sure that as we deliver new services to the marketplace, for example, IoT, that those are built in a way you can configure them in a way that you can monitor them like any other device in the company. Within Azure, for example, we have IoT Hub. You can literally, as you build a device, IoT device, you can literally make sure that it is being monitored in the same way your traditional infrastructure is monitored. There should not be a gap there. You can still apply the same types of logical access controls around them or what have you. So shouldn't be any trade-offs, in security or how you do security, whether it's IT or IoT.
All right. So here, same question. What is the use of stealth in conjunction with cloud activities get you in the future?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things. I'll just tag on to what Mark said. AI ML is becoming interesting, right? We obviously are a very big digital workplace solutions organization. We are a market leader for services, help desk services. We are looking at the introduction of a lot of what you would call as AI ops and automation as it relates to RPA and intelligence voice assistant like IVA. So one of the things we are observing is, as you go on this AI ML journey, there is a larger exposure which you suddenly come across because you're really focusing more around the operationalization and automation for AI ML and certain things or certain areas where you may not be able to really manage, for instance, the way you get the training done for your bots, right? So that's where stealth is a capability we are implementing right now with our digital workplace solutions as part of a journey for AI ops automation, as an example. The other area which we are working very closely with some of our other partners, as well as Microsoft, is really around application security and hardening in the cloud. And how do you make sure that when you deploy certain applications in the cloud, how do you ensure that it is secure and it is not being breached, or there is intrusions which try to make changes to your applications? So I would say those two areas are areas we are currently working on, the AI ops and AI ML ops automation, and then the application security and hardening in the cloud, working with Microsoft and with their Azure teams as well.
Okay, well, we're about out of time, but I just wanted to plug a little bit deeper into how people should be preparing themselves. So if I'm at an organization and I certainly want to be as secure as I can, and I know that I'm going to be doing more in the cloud, what should I be doing now in order to make myself in the best position to take advantage of things like microsegmentation and the technologies behind stealth and how they apply to a cloud like Azure? Let's start with you, Mark. What should I be thinking? How should I get myself ready to take advantage of these things?
Well, first thing is to remember that how you plan and roll out your security estate should be no different than what you're doing with your larger IT planning anyway, your so-called digital transformation. So first thing we should do is really, really close that gap between security teams' efforts to defend the enterprise versus the business's desires, to move forward. The teams should really be working together. In our case, we want to make sure that customers go to the cloud in a secure way without losing visibility into their data, their resources. And so we will continue to put more and more effort in, very proactive services, architecture guidance, recommendations, things that can really help people get started in the cloud. We have an initiative coming out now, or it's already out, I should say, called Azure Blueprint. Essentially, it's a set of configuration. It's a configuration guidance and predefined templates that can help an organization launch a resource in the cloud that's already compliant against, FedRAMP or NIST or ISO or HIPAA or another standard. And I expect that we will continue to keep investing in technologies that help customers securely deploy technologies or cloud resources from the get-go so that we close those gaps in configuration and that we address and close the gaps in reporting and telemetry as well. And we can't do it without great partners that provide those really, really customized solutions for each sector.
Sudhir, last word to you. What's your advice for people to prepare themselves to be ready to take advantage of things like stealth?
The way I would advise folks is really look at a couple of things. One is you really focus on trusted identity in terms of who you work with, who you give access to, and even within your organization, you obviously need to make sure you establish that trusted identity. And how you do it is you make sure it is simple. So you look at an overlay network agnostic framework, which is where stealth can help you. Make sure it is unique. So one individual has one identity. The third is make sure it's irrefutable. So it's undeniable in terms of how you implement it. And then the fourth is make sure it's got the highest level of efficacy, whether it's related to how you deploy and it's also the way you architect your solution. So the net of it is what we obviously recommend is it may sound a little bit interesting, but the reality is trust no one, assume a breach can occur. And then the third is respond really fast to limit damage. If you do these three things, which is trust no one, assume a breach could occur, respond fast to limit damage, you can actually get to a scenario where you would say you've implemented zero trust for your organization.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. You've been listening to a sponsored BriefingsDirect discussion on how cloud deployment planners need to be ever vigilant for all types of cybersecurity attack vectors. And we've learned how Unisys helps Microsoft Azure users take the right precautions for better cloud and distributed use safety. So please join me in thanking our guests. We've been here with Mark McIntyre, Senior Director of Cybersecurity Solutions Group at Microsoft. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks very much.
And we've also been here with Sudhir Mehta. He's Global Vice President of Product Management and Strategy at Unisys. Thank you so much, Sudhir.
Thank you, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining this BriefingsDirect Data Security Insights discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of Unisys and Microsoft-sponsored BriefingsDirect discussions. Thanks again for listening. Please pass this along to your IT community and do come back next time.